This is a production of Cornell University.
All right. It's interesting when we compare notes, some of the things that Heather has said, I'm going to say again. And the reason being is what we both found. They are critical steps in success with these crops. That's why we repeat them, because that's what we've been finding. Now, basically, winter cover crops are really, winter forage is basically a cover crop on steroids. You get all the benefits and then some. Why? Because as she said, you put some management into growing this stuff. You put some effort in, it really comes back to benefit you in multiple ways. You get all the soil nutrient benefits and you get a return on your checkbook that spring. With winter forages, we're increasing our yield per acre 25 to 35%, getting 6 to 10 tons of very high quality feed early. When we had the drought in 16, a lot of people put it in because they needed feed early in the next spring, and that gave them the earliest feed. It produces forage for the high and fresh cows. We can all make heifer feed. We can all make low cow feed. You can't always make that cream puff stuff for the high cows. This is for the high cows. And I've got a number of farmers who have told me they grow it specifically to feed in the summer, because when the heat turns on and the cows slump, they put that in the diet, there is no slump. The cows keep milking right on through. And Dick Grant up at Minor Institute said that's because of the very high NDFD digestibility of this stuff. They can digest that fiber without producing a lot of heat, so they keep on milking. So guys grow it specifically for the high cows, and they get all the benefits of a cover crop while doing it. If you put nitrogen on and sulfur, you need sulfur, you're going to get crude protein equal or beating a lot of the legumes, 20%. You're going to have an energy level, taking that flag leaf stage, you'll have an energy level with a net energy of lactation equaling what a lot of corn silages have. And if you look at the TT-NDFD, the total track NDF digestibility, corn silage, average corn silage or average alfalfa is 42, good stuff is 48, and this stuff is 66. Really good feed. Guys have started growing this, now come back and they grow it again and again and again because of the milk you can get out of this. Now the economics on it. Economics are driven a lot by yield. It runs between 0.7 of a ton per acre to 2 tons per acre. 2 tons per acre is worst case scenario. You need a shot of nitrogen in there and 1 ton dry matter reduction in the corn yield. And I'll explain why that occurs in a minute. We're going to come up to that. This may disappear, especially based on work that Heather has been doing with these short season corn varieties that really crank out the yield. Go look at her work. You could see short season varieties we can grow that really push the yield. You don't always need a yield hit. Optimum planting date. For us, where I am, I'm just south of Albany, New York, 10 days to 2 weeks before wheat. That is the 500-pound gorilla in the room. For yield, you need to get it in the ground, as she said, 10 days to 2 weeks before your wheat planting date. My wheat planting date is September 20th. 10 days before that, I need to have this in the ground September 5th or September 10th. But we need to get the corn off then to do that. By not planting it early, by planting it in October, because that's when we put cover crops on, right? Well, there goes 20% of our yield right off the top. It's gone. Because you need those early heat units to drive the tillering, as she said, you get 9 tillers instead of 1 or 2 tillers. So if you were going to plant late and add more seed, as seed guys like to tell you to do, you're going to have to put 450 pounds of seed out there to get the same yield, which is ridiculous. You need to get it in on time. Now, Bill Cox's work found that there was 3/4 of a ton of silage loss for every 5-day shorter season corn on average. But with Heather and Joe Lawrence's work, where they can see that these shorter season varieties can crank out the yield, I had one this year, an 82-day variety, gave me 30 tons to the acre. But we're going to take this as an assumption. And if we go from 105-day to an 85-day, so we can get our triticale planted sooner or our rye planted sooner, we're going to give up a ton of dry matter, which is about 3,780 pounds of milk. We're replacing it with 2 to 4 tons of dry matter of winter forage, and we're now gaining 8,000 to 16,000 pounds of milk per acre for 3,700 we gave up on the corn. Go back and look at her short season corn data. By shortening up the corn, you're not going to be losing yield if you double crop. And the important part is we may not even lose yield with some of these shorter season varieties. This is a more graphic example. If we did assume that 3-ton yield, this is what it looks like if we put in a single long season, 20 ton to the acre versus 17 with a double crop. But then when you put on a minimum double crop or an optimum double crop, we get higher yields, and I can explain some of those pieces why. It has to do somewhat with their climate zone. But the bottom line is now we are getting more yield than with a full season crop. And you're not out there in November chopping corn silage. If you're out there in November chopping corn silage, you are packing the snot out of that ground, and you're getting long-term yield reduction. Get your corn off when the ground is dry, get your triticale in, and then you can take off and keep going. If we remove the residue, it makes it easier to plant the next crop. Now, there is a problem with some of this, and that is called allelopathy. And that's what I had brought up with Sarah, who talked just before lunch. Allelopathy is real. It will inhibit grass crops growing next. Corn, sorghum, teff can be inhibited by having winter grain residue there in the ground. We get around it by using strip till. I sent this in, I had another picture of what we use. Basically, it's a clearing coulter that has little like knives on it, and it scrapes the top ½ or inch of dirt away. It removes that allelopathy from the plant. You plant it into clean ground, and it pops up out of the ground and grows with no problem whatsoever. If you don't do that, you are going to be taking somewhat of a yield loss. They had a 4-ton yield loss at Minor Institute, where they planted right into rye. Well, a lot of that was allelopathy, just inhibiting the plant. You scrape that aside, you can use your no-till planter, plant right into it. This is going to allow air and water to move in. For clay soils, this is huge, because clay soils seal over like this countertop on the first rain. Air and water can't go in and out. When it rains, it all washes off and takes the soil with it. The Virgins clays are perfect for that kind of stuff, for sealing over. But if you're planting into this, all those stems have a root going down into the ground, allows air and water in and out. Okay, if we have allelopathy, it's sort of like getting lemons. You know, God gave you lemons, so what do? You make lemonade. All right, we have allelopathy. It keeps weeds from growing, lamb's quarters, pigweed, ragweed, all those keeps from growing. It keeps the corn crop from growing. It keeps the sorghum crop from growing. It doesn't affect legumes. So we said, well, duh. Normally, people don't like to put in legumes very often. They don't like to rotate. Why? Because they only get a ½ a crop seeding year. And so then the second year you get full year and then yields start to come off over time afterwards. So we don't want to seed down and take a ½ a crop. You have an option. You grow winter forage. You take off 2 to 4 tons of dry matter, come back in and no-till your alfalfa into it, getting 1 cutting of alfalfa, and the total yield that year is equal to your full years. You never take a yield loss. You now get a full yield on that year. An added benefit on that is, first of all, the wind stays up and off of it. Some guys found that this last year when it was really dry. They planted their alfalfa, no-till into triticale stubble, and it still grew. It kept that drying wind off of those little plants. They could get established. They took off and grew. It works with alfalfa, red clover, and soybeans. It works very well. no-tilling it in. It reduces seeding risk, as I just pointed out. It increases seeding year yield, which I just mentioned a minute ago. You've got your total yield. Stops erosion loss. I had a farmer call me up here about in July or August, and he said, I put in 500-600 acres of alfalfa this year, plowed it all up, smoothed it all up, planted alfalfa on the whole thing. I had 150 acres of triticale. I mowed it off and I no-tilled alfalfa. And this year we had a lot of gully washers, downpours. He had it in June. He got hammered. He says, I've got 500 to 600 acres of gullies, rocks, and no seeding because the field's washed out, and I have 150 acres of cream puff alfalfa that's doing just fine, thank you. His question to me was, does it justify the cost of a new no-till drill? So I gave him the names of a couple people to talk to. He never talked to them. I think he just wanted a reality check. He went out and bought the no-till drill. He's doing all his legumes this way. And the other benefit that happens on big farms, it inhibits weeds that I mentioned, it moves the workload. The first nice week, the first nice day in April, you're a week behind. Second nice day in April, you're 2 weeks behind. Isn't that the way the workload usually goes? You're trying to get seedings in, get ground worked up, stones planted, and spread manure, and get that ground worked up so you can plant corn all at the same time. We take all the seedings and we move them right out of there. Come springtime, you spread your manure, you plant your corn. Come in, harvest your triticale or rye. Take it off, go get your grass fields. Triticale comes off just before the cool season grasses. So you take your triticale, you take your cool season grasses, then go to your alfalfa grass mixes, finish up with good alfalfa. Now it's beginning of June. Come back in that field, spray it with a quarter Roundup and a quarter 2,4-D, no, just a quarter Roundup, I'm sorry, a quarter Roundup or less. I've used half quarter Roundup and a high gallonage of water, 17, 18 gallons the acre. You hose it down because there's a lot of little shoots and plants coming up. You wipe them out, come back in with your no-till planter. This field had no post-emergent herbicide. That's what it looks like. Pretty good. It will grow very well. This has been a huge sleeper in winter forages that few people have realized works, and it works really well. Now, managing this for forage, you have two managements. Heather touched on this. You have a fall nitrogen management and you have a spring nitrogen management. And they're two very different pieces, but they are interrelated. Sarah's talk just before lunch here today was right in the ballroom, was right on target with terms of tying up nitrogen from the fall, keeping it out of the water. The biomass that you have is the most important factor. It is driven by planting date. Nitrogen stored is driven by biomass times the planting date. 62 pounds of nitrogen we picked up after a corn crop. If we planted it late, we picked up 4 pounds. Where did the 60 pounds go? Into the water supply or denitrified. Neither, which is good. Both are losses to the farm, one's a pollutant. But if we plant this on time, we're going to pick up 60 pounds of nitrogen. Now, we have taken this a little bit further. You'll see in a minute. The benefits that you get from cover crops or winter forage accrue according to the biomass produced. This is planted September 9th. This is planted October 6th. This is going to be not needing any herbicides. This will need a herbicide because there'll be weeds in it. This is tying up the nitrogen, adding organic matter. The roots are going deeper, adding soil structure, soil health, and producing those tillers Heather had talked about that give you the yield potential for the next year. All of this because you get it in on time. On time is very critical. And then Dr. Ketterings and myself have both come up with a similar graph here in our data, our researches each, which is as your biomass goes up, the pounds of nitrogen stored goes up. And I did find out, Q, that mine didn't have a higher nitrogen, didn't have a higher line with manure. It was the exact same line, no difference. That's something new I just figured out yesterday. But what we did is we said, all right, if this will tie up nitrogen, what if I put some manure on in the fall? Because in my previous work, anytime I put nitrogen on in the fall, I got a yield increase across all nitrogen levels the next year. So I said, well, I don't want to buy fertilizer, and we all got manure we need to unload. Where are we going to go with it? What if we put some on the ground? So we came in and we put 4,000 gallons on, incorporated it right away and planted. We came in October, put 4,000 on, incorporated it and planted. At the end of November, we had 123 pounds of nitrogen stored in the above ground material. In the October one, we had 4 pounds of nitrogen. Everything was still in the soil, and much of that was gone by spring if it had converted over to nitrate. So we have another piece going on here where we're looking at putting that manure in. We have a new injector. It's just been built. It's in Iowa right now. They're trying to get a truck to haul it here. And we're going to try coming in end of November and injecting right into the sod of the winter forage manure so we don't need nitrogen in the spring. So you put it in late, it's the ammonia form, it's going to stay there till spring, and it warms up, it's going to convert to nitrate, but as soon as it warms up, the grass of the winter forage is already growing and it's going to suck it right up. So remember I said 75 pounds of nitrogen, we had a higher nitrogen, higher tons of dry matter to break even. We think we can drop that so we don't need anything in the spring. Yes, I am using Instinct with it, but we don't know whether it pays or not. We're still working on that. My problem is the, the research is on a farm that Cornell is selling tomorrow. And I've got to sweet talk whoever buys it to let me finish my work. So it's, we're on tenterhooks until tomorrow. I'll tell you the answer tomorrow. All right, if we put manure on in the fall, the following spring, we got 14% higher yield where we had put it on versus not putting manure on. Where we doing it in October, we had 33% higher yield. Well, remember, there is still, whoops, back that up the wrong way. There is still a significant portion of that nitrogen is lost because you don't have enough biomass to tie it up and store it in the crop. That is the critical piece. This is an environmentally sound program. This I have real reservations on in terms of polluting the water supply. Top dressing it in the spring. I do not recommend top dressing it in the spring. If you've done a good job planting this in the fall, this is what it looks like. You spread manure on that, it's going to get into the crown. And I have one farm, they refuse to admit anything, but I understand why, because it's a complete embarrassment. Put manure on, chop the stuff off, put it in the silo, and when they started to feed the bunk out, they hit it with the loader, and the whole pile slid down in a slimy, maggot-filled mess. You don't want to feed that to the cows. They insisted on it, screwed the cows up royally, making things even worse. I don't recommend putting manure on the top of any of this. There is some possibilities for injection. We are working on that as I go right now. Hopefully we'll be able to continue the research on it. All right, yes.
So the late application of manure, is that as close to freeze up basically as you can?
Yes, we're going to probably do it just before Thanksgiving.
And only feel good about that if you're injecting, or would surface application also be useful?
Surface application problem comes back to this.
Sure.
We get it mixed into those crowns. This was taken last week. That's what my winter forage looks like going into the winter. Just putting it on top of that, it's going to get into the crowns and it's going to be there in spring, and that's where you could get into real troubles. That's why we're looking at an injector that will slice through, put it into the ground so we don't have the problem. If that works, we could theoretically come in March when the ground has maybe a little bit of frost left in it and put it in then. We don't know. We're way out on a limb on this.
You weren't worried about heat contamination as far as losing N for surface application just before freeze up?
My concern would be we're expecting a lot of rain this winter, 200% of normal precipitation. We're supposed to be warmer than normal. And if rain is leaching through this and the ground is frozen, then it's still running off in the water. That's my concern. There's some real hesitancies in here you got to be careful with. We don't know all the answers. I'm just telling you where we're going with the research. Okay, as Heather said before, stage of growth is a bigger effect than the species of grain chosen. This is stage 8. At stage 8, It's not ready yet. The leaf is still rolled up in the stem here, coming out. You're not getting full yield. This is stage 9. The last leaf is out and the head is in here. This is what we hit for high quality winter forage, whether it's rye, wheat, or barley, or triticale. This is what we hit right here. Now, I had stage 8 on a Thursday. I had stage 9 on a Friday. On a Tuesday, rather, from Thursday to Tuesday. And in that time frame, we had a 35% yield increase. If I could give you something to put on to get a 35% yield increase, you jump on it. When in this case, you built the factory, let it produce. Let it produce until you get to here. Now, this is stage 10, that's boot stage. When we were at 12,000 pounds of milk per cow, that was fine. But we're at 30,000 pounds of milk per cow. This is where we need to be, is at stage 9. That being said, a couple of pieces. First, Jeff's work showed that Triticale, the red line here, loses quality at a slower rate than wheat or rye. The other piece is, what is the temperature of the year you're doing this? 2010, it was a normal to warm spring. As it went down, here's either this one or this one is flag leaf stage. Quality is going down as time went on. All right, this is digestibility KD rate per hour. 2013, we were at flag leaf stage. This is actually boot stage here, flag leaf boot, and headed out. And it's still real high quality. Why? It was cold. 2013, 2 hours north of us, they had 3 feet of snow. It was down to freezing or just above freezing that night. So if it's that cold, you don't have to rush quite as much. You have a bigger window to get things done. Unfortunately, usually when it's cold like that, it's also damp and rainy, so you can't always get out there. So it doesn't always work. All right, it rains for 3 weeks. The stuff is all headed out. What am I going to do with it? Well, first of all, there's a lot of farms feed straw. So you could chop this stuff as head straw and you put it in your TMR. The other is, at late boot through early milk stage, it's intermediate on protein, moderate on energy. Digestibility will not inhibit intake for good heifer growth without the heifers getting fat. It makes an excellent heifer feed. I have one farm that grows this for their dry cows. They don't put any manure on that field. They grow it for dry cows. If I grow red clover and triticale, the middle of June, I'm pulling off 21 tons to the acre of 35% dry matter material. If I go just triticale, I pulled off 16, almost 17. The farmer says he gets consistently 18 tons to the acre. Now, I would not use red clover. I would use medium red. Red clover heads out too soon, and then it deteriorates real fast. Medium red keeps right on growing and can produce a lot more yield. You look at the dry matters, that stuff is mow right to a windrow and go ahead and chop it. Now, if you're doing it stage 9 and you're doing it for the milk cows, do not mow it to a narrow windrow. You need to use wide swath, same day haylage to get that quality in. The sugar runs 20%. One year it ran 26%. The guys I was doing the work with said, we can't use your data. Nobody's going to believe us. That's 26% sugar. Sunny days, cold nights. It'll produce the sugar. And as one farmer said, he started worrying about the cows because when they pulled up with a wagon, the mixer wagon with this stuff in it, he said all the cows jumped up and come running over to him. So I said, well, as long as they're doing that, I wouldn't worry about it. They start rolling, the heifers start rolling it and smoking it out back of the barn, you can probably worry. High yield, 6 to 14 tons to the acre, 2 to 3 times what alfalfa will yield. So that means your management for harvesting stuff has to be a little different. Here the guy was mowing it, thought he was doing a really good job. 60% of cutter bar width. You need to be more than 80% of cutter bar width. What we did is we stopped them. We opened up the shields in the front of the machine. Yes, he was driving on it, but now we are at 80% of cutter bar width. The second piece is mowing with these shields down, the lawyer shields down versus up. When we mow it down, what happens is it comes up, it hits it and drops it in a lump, and lumps don't dry. This is Curtis Martin in Savannah. He was measuring every 2 feet was a pile, and the piles don't dry. He opened it up so it flows right through and out the back. It spreads it uniformly. It's going to dry a whole lot faster. Here's the lumps all the way up through and down and over, whoop, back up. This here, we opened up the back of the machine and you can see the difference in the pass. It lays it out loose, fluffy. It's going to let air through it and let it dry. But no matter what you do, as one farmer said, if I grow this right and I'm pulling off 3.5 tons of dry matter, it goes out the back of the machine and it goes splat. And it dries on the outer 3/4 of an inch and the rest sits there. So 2 hours after mowing, we recommend you come in with a tedder and ted it, lift and spread it, all right? Get it spread out. You gotta watch your forward speed. Otherwise you make tedder lumps. That machine can go faster than it can handle the tonnage. Remember, this is 2 to 3 times more than alfalfa. And you go wailing through there with the tractor, it's gonna go, but it's gonna grab big hunks, pack them together and throw them out the back of the machine. You need to watch your forward speed. Keep the RPMs up, but watch your forward speed so it can pull it apart. I don't own stock in the company, but every farmer I know who has bought a Vermeer hook tine tedder says it's a different machine. It works very well to do stuff like this. It really pulls it apart, throws the green on the top and the dry on the bottom. They said it's fascinating to work. It works very well, but you do need to ted it. So harvest, you want to mow it wide, 80% of cutter bar width, ted it after 2 hours of drying. If your machine is not putting it at 80%, then when you get done mowing the field, go in with the tedder and ted it out. Chop it longer, an inch or more. We chop BMR corn. Why? We chop it long because if we don't, it falls apart and flushes out of the rumen before you get the extent of digestion that you want. This stuff will digest faster than BMR corn will. So you need the longer particles. And the longer particles are less likely to juice if you don't get it dry enough. The longer the particles, the less juicing is going on. You want to ensile it the same day as you mow it, unless it goes down below 40 degrees. If it's below 40 at night, down into the 30s, you can hold it overnight. You're going to be all right. The temperatures are cold enough. Otherwise, you need to get it in the same day you mow it. And then use a homolactic type bacteria to get those high sugars to ferment it 24 hours, 48 hours. It's cold. Questions? Not at you in about 5 minutes. Yes.
I was wondering, one of the things that we've seen, and we saw this last year too, is when people plant too early, we see a lot more winter kill because too much growth, mother. You guys may not experience that as much, but that's been a pretty big issue. People, they're over. They're like doing too well, they're like getting the corn off.
Yes, I'm back and forth on that because I had a study where it was planted early, 120 pounds of nitrogen, planted October, 120 pounds of nitrogen, planted October, no nitrogen. The dead stuff went right on in over all three. That's where the water set in March when the ground started to thaw. And you have those virgin clays and you get these ponds out there in March, the snow's melting, and you get these big lakes in spots you don't expect them. Snow mold comes through and really hammers it at that point.
Yeah, I think, that's probably some of it, but we definitely, like as an example, last year we saw quite a bit of winter kill, and really where we saw it the most is where they overlapped. So it was even thicker than normal. So
Did you get any icing?
There might have been a little icing, but it definitely was more pronounced.
Yeah.
It was much thicker.
All right.
So I'm just curious.
I haven't run into that. Sarah ran into it with hers. I haven't run into it, but the icing could be a big factor.
And that definitely been more.
Yeah, I'll find out this year because I've got some stuff I think I have 2.5 tons of dry matter out there, and I had 8,000 gallons of manure before I planted it. That's an experiment. And so that is set up to get really nailed. We get the right conditions, we'll see what it does. But the flip side is when we get a canopy like that, if it doesn't smush, you guys get feet of snow. If it doesn't smush down, then it actually protects the crowns from the cold, so it can help. The other possibility, you know, knowing where you're from up there, it's probably the woolly mammoths or mastodons trampled it. That's she'll back over me in the parking lot for that one.
Well, we could even overwinter. I remember the first trials we did with Forage in 2004. The varieties we had then, when you made.
I have serious reservations about the varieties you're growing now.
Well,
Those,
and that was a very old study.
okay.
that I showed. It was more comparison
Mhm.
to evaluate.
Yeah.
You know, different species, but yeah.
The other piece that comes in, I didn't put it in this talk because I had a limited amount of time. You need to get it in, especially in your area with your heavier soils and colder temperatures. It needs to be 1.25 inches in the ground. If it's not 1.25 inches, what happens in the springtime, freezing and thaw, it'll pop it up 1/2 inch. That's all it takes. And then the air dries those roots and the plant sits there as this little green stub and never grows. And I said, winter killed. No, you didn't get it in the ground. It was a hardware issue. The loose nut at the steering wheel didn't plant it deep enough. You need to get it in the ground. I made that mistake early on. I didn't get it shallow. I didn't get it deep enough. And I got royally screwed because it died on me. And up in the north, we put our varieties up north. We're looking at moving our variety trial now up to Willsboro. They got to get it in 1.25 inches in the ground at least so it doesn't heave. That's another piece. But ice sheeting and packing down, I haven't experienced that in 18 years of doing it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It can still happen. Yeah.
Other questions for Tom?
Yes.
So after corn silage, if you were to spread manure
Mhm.
and then plant
Mhm.
the cereal or
Mhm.
whatever, that would be safe.
That's what I did. That works very
Right,
well.
right, okay.
Yep, that
So
works
it's
very
not
well.
when it's green on.
You know, not when it's growing on the top. Yeah.
I'm from Pennsylvania, and one of our guys will plant their alfalfa in the winter kill too.
Mhm.
And so your idea of planting it into the Triticale stubble instead will intrigue me because then you get that spring forward harvest. Do you see any issues with taking that practice and moving it further south?
No, no, just that you're planting your alfalfa earlier. And you'll get, that's the other thing. You guys can get 5 tons of dry matter, 6 tons of dry matter off your Triticale. I'm doing good to get 3. She's doing good to get 2. Because as you move north, it gets tougher and tougher because you got to plant it earlier and earlier. And pretty soon, I work with some guys up in Lacombe, which is 2 hours north of Calgary. You can't see polar bears from there, but they're just around the corner. And they are growing a 60-day corn. It takes 90 days to get it mature, but they're planting all their Triticale in around the 15th of August. They got to get it in early enough to get the tillering, to get the growth on it, to get the yield and make it through the winter. But you have a higher yield potential than I do because I used to live down in Quarryville, and we have that long fall and that long spring there. You have a lot more yield potential than I do.
Risk of that planting after critical harvest, soil moisture at that time.
Mhm.
So you really would have to watch that.
Yeah, I had a picture I sent Sarah. It's a guy in 2016 planted corn after his Triticale, and he has what was she, a 6-month-old and maybe a 2-year-old standing next to his corn, and his corn was tasseled, and it was as high as the 2-year-old, which is about this high. But he said his neighbor's wasn't any better, and he has a whole barn or bunk full of Triticale. So he did all right. He says it was fine, and he's going to do it again. It will dry the ground. If you have heavy ground like Heather fights with up there all the time, it helps to pump the water out in the spring. So it allows you to get on. But if it turns dry, that is an issue. But interestingly, the first year I did that alfalfa, I took it off, put the alfalfa in the beginning of June. We had 1 3/4 inch of rain about a week after. And then we had 1/4 inch of rain the 3rd week in June, and we had nothing through July to the middle of August. Bill Smith looked at my plot in September. He says, it looks like a 2-year-old stand. That's how well it grew. It really did well. And some guys in Western New York tried it in 16, and they were amazed at how well it worked right through the dry. You have a little bit of moisture, that air is kept off of it, and they can get started. But yes, it can get dry enough that nothing grows. It's not a perfect system. It can get wiped out. Then I put stuff in April and had to get wiped out too. Yes, because you're not opening the ground up and drying it. And you have to no-till it. You open a slit and a press wheel drill, put it in. Don't try broadcasting your seed or using a brilliant seeder and then rolling it afterwards. You might as well just take the seed and throw it in the bushes. It does not work. Been there, done that. Don't do it. Yes.
I had rye combine back in July.
Mhm.
We were ready to plant triticale. Now, that triticale is high. If I mowed that September, October,
If it was that high, it was a very good chance that has already started sending a seed head up, especially because beginning of September, we had some really cold weather. It may have got enough chilling that it vernalized and it's now sending a seed head up, and it may not make it through the winter simply because it was planted way too early. Now, what we have done though is we've planted the beginning of August, we've planted oats, 100 pounds of oats, 80 pounds of triticale. And then we take the oats off, laid the manure in on it, and then take the oats off end of September, cut it 4 inches, not shorter. It has to be 4 inches. And we got a couple tons of really nice oats feed, and then all the triticale started growing after that. We moved it. We took a triticale crop off the next spring. So you can do it. But if you get it too early and it grows too long and it gets a chance to vernalize, it's going to get killed out. It will die.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.